Welcome to the AirPower Airwaves, the AirPower Manufacturing Solutions podcast series where we talk about manufacturing issues that impact you. Hey, this is Travis Stairwald, and welcome to another edition of AirPower Airwaves. All right, so we're going to do something a little different today. We have never had Graco in the studio, and I am glad to announce that the Season 1, Episode 9, we have Graco and we have AirPower together on a podcast. Some of you might be thinking, you've done business with AirPower for a long time. You might be thinking this is the paint crew. Well, you're wrong. We could move paint.
We could,
but today we're going to go down a different rabbit hole, and we're going to talk about how those two worlds are going to possibly or are coming together.
They recombining, yes.
That's right. So,
yes.
First, I want to introduce our guest, Matt Bergman. Matt, welcome to AirPower Airwaves.
Yes, thanks so much for having me. Really excited to be here, and man, we're going to have a great conversation
Yes,
today.
we are.
Yeah.
Fortunately, we did a little homework, so I think we've got a good plan. And to my your title with... I want to make sure I get this right. Global Sealants and Adhesives Equipment Manager.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yep.
So we are going to talk about sealants and adhesives quite a bit today. So we'll just move on to another introduction really fast. Jason Butler. Jason is a fellow application specialist within AirPower.
That's correct.
In the Move branch.
Mostly with sealants and adhesives.
Okay.
Mostly. Can be other things. Can be paints. Can be, other fluids. But mostly sealants and adhesives.
Okay. And you've got, how many are in the crew up here?
We've got 5 total.
Okay.
There's 3 of me. So 2
3
other application
Yep.
specialists. And then we have 2 technical specialists. So they're going to be working with putting equipment together, installations, runoffs, trials, lab demonstrations, things of that sort.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And just so that everybody listening, AirPower has invested quite a bit of money, as well as Graco, and invested quite a bit of money in the facility in High Point, North Carolina, where we have a lot of hands-on opportunities to prove out the work. Yep. Or prove out the equipment and what it can do. We shot several videos in there. Some of them will be coming out in the future. We just shot one of the ram and the drum.
The proper procedure to swap drums in a ram pump system.
Coming soon to AirPower Live. All right, so really quick, if you are listening to this on the AirPower Airwaves audio version of the podcast, I would encourage you to also go to YouTube, to the AirPower channel on YouTube. That's actually the first place. This podcast will usually go out first on YouTube, and then within 24 hours it'll be fully uploaded to Buzzsprout and AirPower Airwaves. And so anywhere you need to find your podcast, wherever you enjoy looking or listening to your podcast, you can find it by searching airpowerairwaves.com. Airwaves, one word. All right. Any questions that you have, you can call 1-800-334-1001 and ask to speak to somebody in inside sales or an account manager or someone to help with whatever you need. If you talk to the person who answers the phone, you're going to get an answer or be put to the right person to answer those questions. So without further ado, let's talk about Graco.
Yes.
All right. So for those that are listening, we have done a lot with the finishing sector of Graco for so long, and then we've done a lot of work with the sealants and adhesive side, the AFD side. So let's for those that don't know about the AFD side, let's go down that a little bit. Let's talk about that part of the company.
Definitely. Yeah, so I actually want to explain it kind of as history repeats itself, because I'm going to do a little forward looking here too. Let's start back in probably the 1980s. That's really when Graco started investing and looking into sealants and adhesives and applications. And the market really started growing a lot in the 80s. So it started with an acquisition of a company called Piles.
Okay.
That joined our industrial group. It was mainly based in Chicago, actually. That had a good history for about a decade. Then moving into the late 90s and into the 2000s, we made several more acquisitions, namely Liquid Control, Guzmer, Glasscraft, Fluid Automation. You may recognize some of those brand names from over the years. And with the acquisition of those businesses, that formed our Advanced Fluid Dispense group.
Okay.
Before that, we had been part of an industrial division, and we shared a lot of resource, engineering resource, and technology with our liquid finishing and process groups. Since then, we've been AFD. You know, the 2000s came, we got the Liquid Control building in Ohio, North Canton, Ohio, and we became Advanced Fluid Dispense. Now, about a decade later, 15 years later, we're looking at recombining with liquid finishing. Okay, so there's actually going to be a new division at Graco called Industrial Division.
You think a lot of that is because, you know, shared technology on both sides now that may not have been that way back then?
Yeah, yes, and I think the acquisitions played a part in that as well.
Okay.
The acquisitions, we wanted to make sure that as they joined Graco, they had kind of their own autonomy for a while to grow themselves, become part of the Graco culture. But now that we've kind of hit a steady state with that, we realize that we share customers, we share technology, so it makes a lot of sense from a business synergy standpoint to regroup these two divisions and have a one cohesive voice for us.
Perfect. So let's, I know we're going to run down some products, but I'm going to turn to Jason here for real quick here. What is, give us a little bit of the lay of the land as Air Power in this market. You know, Air Power was traditionally a finishing company for so many years. We're nestled right here in High Point, North Carolina. The corporate office is right where all the furniture capital of the world was happening.
Sure.
So it made sense, right? But we're so much more diverse now than we've ever been.
Yeah, Air Power was finishing and still is, a lot of finishing
Absolutely.
business in today's environment. But we realized that Air Power needed to diversify and get into other things. And, we kind of set it up in this assemble, move, and coat kind of three-headed a monster of what we do, and the first would be assemble, which is falls in that tool category, that material handling, ergonomics category of industry or manufacturing, and then the move, and this is where sealants and adhesives kind of falls in the most, but not necessarily all the way into move, in that we are moving fluids. We are moving fluids, whether it be precisely or in a process environment where we're moving a lot of fluid.
Right.
That's more that move category. And then coat is what it is, right? We're finishing, we're finalizing a product, but we also fall into that coating realm as well. Not all coatings are necessarily a paint. They can be a glue, right? For instance,
Right.
they can be, a lot of things are the adhesives are putting panels together, for instance, right? They're coating a solid, flat surface, and that kind of falls in our world as well.
And the way the adhesives work, people don't necessarily think of this, but when you're at home and you're gluing something together, it's not a precision thing. But you look at even something simple as growing up in a cabinet family. My dad built cabinets. When you're spraying the adhesive on the Formica to go on the countertop,
That's right.
you had to have an even dispersion of that adhesive to go on there.
That's right.
And in our world, too much or not enough can make a major difference on how it works.
It can be detrimental to the product,
Absolutely.
right? And also very costly. We don't want to waste any more material than we have to, no different than in paint. But we also have to have the adhesion, and we have to have the structural bond of these adhesives to do what they're intended to do.
Correct.
So, yep.
All right, so let's talk about. We went through here beforehand, and I told you guys I wasn't going to give you any notes, but I want to talk about some the product categories or topics of topical categories that we agreed upon ahead of time. So I want to go through these really quick. Single component material equipment. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, and when I talk about this equipment, this is nice. We're going to flow through basically starting with the material in a drum or a bucket of some kind, and then moving it to the product that you want to actually dispense onto. So single component material equipment, let's just start with the basics. You have pumps, ram unloaders, drum unloaders. Those are all kind of industry terms that we use to get that raw material out of its barrel or whatever container it comes in the first place. Typically, those are pneumatically driven pumps, and we're going to talk a little bit about the way the industry is moving there a little bit later. But yeah, it's essentially a very simple system to pressurize the material and move it into a fluid hose that then goes downstream to the next component of the system, right? So single component, when I use the word single component, that doesn't mean that it's not used for two component materials. You just need two single component pumps
Yep.
to provide, A and B components to your metering system downstream. Yep.
Okay. So we've got, let's see here, ram pumps, supply ram units. We want to go down through those at all?
Well, you might recognize brand names, Duraflow, Checkmate. Those are kind of our flagship pumps that we use for sealants and adhesives. But again, they come in many sizes, different materials based on your chemical. You may need stainless for some. You could get away with carbon steel for others. So a wide variety. It really depends on the application and the type of material that you're going to be using to choose that type of pump.
All right, let's get into the second category of two component materials. And I have here metered, mixed, and dispensed.
Yes, so meter mix dispense is the industry term. We're taking two materials, combining them at the last possible moment before it hits the substrate, and that's what creates the chemical reaction to actually create a bond or a glue of some kind. So we do have several kind of flagship products in this category. Starting with the smallest, we have a kind of a legacy product called PD44. That one is a positive displacement single acting device that's used for making really small dots of adhesives.
Okay.
Used in electronics.
You had one of those up here, right?
Yeah, so some of the device or the...
You can pick that up.
Yeah, you're gonna grab it. The beads on this are actually dispensed by a very similar product to that. This is kind of the next evolution of PD44. It's a product called the PRX. Again, positive displacement, single acting pumps. The two components each have their own piston and cylinder to displace the on ratio material. And these are some of the patterns that you would see, small dots of adhesives that maybe go on top of a circuit chip on a computer board or something like that. Small beads of adhesives. So that's kind of the smallest we get into.
And we'll put a close-up picture of this for you guys.
Yeah.
To see.
So moving up from there, you get into a really high runner for us, the PR70. It stands for positive ratio, and it's 70 cc's is the largest shot size. Yeah. So it's a single acting, two component dispense unit, really nice accessories you can add to it with onboard tanks, essentially just pour material into the top. It's kind of a standalone benchtop unit for...
what are some of the ideal applications for that?
I see it a lot for potting. Potting is because a lot of pottings, the stations, say at a electronics house or an automotive supplier of some kind, a lot of times those are by hand, kind of a station where they bring the part up to it, and it could be a robot even bringing it to, or a conveyor, but the part goes underneath the valve of the PR70. We call it the MD2 valve typically. Material is dispensed. We put in, say, 50 cc's of an epoxy or 50 cc's of some sort of potting material to encapsulate that whole assembly into this glue and protect it from the environment. So that's a main a big application.
Yeah, another application would be for the filter manufacturers.
Sure.
We see a lot of urethanes, two-part urethanes that are used in the whether it be HEPA filters, air filters for vehicles.
Sealing up the,
Just sealing up the gap. So between
Yep.
the framework of a filter and the actual filter
Media.
media, right? You're going to have to seal that. That way they can do their pressure testing on those.
where you
filters.
have your cartridge filters also that up
Absolutely.
on that bead that's up and around the top and the bottom
That's right.
that seals that in. Yeah, because if you don't seal that up, first of all, you got to have something strong enough to hold a flimsy media
That's right.
to the metal, and then or beverage board or whatever you're dealing with, and then the second part is you got to have something that can. I wonder if there's an expansion to that at all, because you have to really seal that up. Otherwise, you're going to have bypass.
Yeah, generally what they do, they'll flood the framework and then they'll set the filter media or the accordion filter media into that framework, and it seals up every square inch,
Yep.
millimeter of that filter media. That way there's no bypass between the media and the actual framework of the filter.
Perfect.
Yep.
Perfect. Well,
So
I
moving
play
on.
around in that world a little bit.
Yeah, you know filters a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, so moving up from the PR70 into our more high production, more automated dispensing systems, we have the EFR and the HFR.
Okay.
So the very similar technologies to them both. Really, the names, they stand for electric fixed ratio and hydraulic fixed ratio. The fundamental theory behind how they work is the same. They're two positive displacement continuous flow pumps, and that's, Jason, you're making sure we talk about continuous flow.
Yep.
The other machines we've talked about so far do have a reload cycle. So you dispense and then reload, and dispense, reload. EFR and HFR, you can do a continuous bead until you run out of material in your drum.
Okay.
Right? There's no reload cycle in the pumps on those units. So we see those a lot doing precision beads and things like that, because the user doesn't have to be aware of where their pump is in the stroke. It can go through a changeover and it'll still control that flow so nicely. You'll get a perfect bead no matter where you are.
There is no reset.
There's no reset. Yep,
That's correct.
no recycle or reload. So electric fixed ratio, that's kind of our newest two-component system that we have out there. Very powerful precision electric motor on it, and we really see an industry trend moving towards the benefits of electric there.
I heard you guys talking earlier about that a little
Yeah.
bit. And I don't know if this is a good way to segue into it, but we talked about trends and electric.
Electric is going everywhere, right?
Everywhere.
And so what we talked about earlier was
The big thing was to go to battery.
that's right. Battery,
Yeah.
whether it be battery tools or battery,
Yep.
now cars, right? The most popular vehicle in the country right now is a Tesla, whether it be a 3 or an S or the X or whatever. And so, we're seeing that the electrification of the industry, the manufacturing world is coming because, generally speaking, compressed air is one of, if not the most expensive utilities that a
Absolutely.
manufacturer is going to incur, right? So what we want to do is not necessarily, are we ever going to get completely away from pneumatics? No, we never are. But there's going to be certain situations, certain, processes that can go either way. And with what we're seeing now in the advances of using servo motors, stepper motors, those type technologies to drive the pumping of these fluids, and not only drive just to pump them from, say, point A to point B, but to precisely do them is very important. And I think when we start to see the cost, kind of like when you pay for gas in a car versus charging it every night, right? When you start to see the cost benefit of that electric system over what you have historically used a pneumatic system for, it's almost a no-brainer, really.
Yep.
And we've had customers come to us with the specific intent to buy electric for the sole purpose of eliminating noise.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of times you think manufacturing is loud and it's, there's all types of things going on, but in clean room environments, for instance, right, where everything has to be perfect, noise is a big deal.
Yeah.
So we've had customers come to us to go, and it's the decibel level difference is unbelievable. So not only that, but the control that you get, that's where I think Graco is taking this to the next level of how much control you get out of something you've never had control of before. You know, we've always used fluid regulators, you know, whether it be pneumatically actuated or manually regulated fluid regulators. And you know, to have the ability to take something out of the fluid stream that can cause you problems and requires maintenance and is costly, to take it out completely because you can manage that flow rate of any fluid through the pump is kind of next level, to be honest with you. And so, you know, I'm excited to see where it goes because I think it can go everywhere. I think that's the trend. I think, you know, eventually we're going to see everything that's now pneumatically driven go electric at some point, right? But that's for the future to tell us. But you know, I think it's really exciting, especially with the EFRs the EFR that's come out. You know, we're seeing a lot of success with it, for sure.
Perfect.
Yep.
Yeah.
You want to add anything to that?
I think you hit it. It's all about accuracy and control. For us here at Graco, our development teams are constantly trying to improve, you know, our bead performance and how accurate our shots. If you ask for a 50 cc shot, you better get 50 cc's. The best way to do that is with an electric motor.
Yeah.
A pneumatic motor is just inherently difficult to control through the changeovers, and depending on the customer's shop air, if that fluctuates just a little bit and you don't have regulation on that, your pressure, your outbound pressure of your pump is going to be all over the place.
Yep.
With electric, you can just forget about all of that. You know exactly the position of the pump all the time. You know the speed of the pump. You know how much torque you're applying to the pump. And we can write outstanding software around all of that to really improve the performance of your adhesive.
Fantastic. All right, so did we cover two component materials pretty well?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move into heated materials. We have Thermoflow and Invisipack.
Yeah. So Thermoflow first, let's touch on that one. That's more of our generic bulk unloader for hot melt materials. So for people that aren't familiar, these materials are solid at room temperature.
Yep.
You actually have to melt them in order to flow them. You know,
They come in
through a
big
hose.
gaylords and
Yep.
scoop out or funnel out into
That's
the
exactly.
system.
So typically, you know, you're melting 300, 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Still pretty viscous material after it's melted, but it thins out pretty nicely with temperature. And then you take that material and you feed it to another heated metering system. I think we're going to talk about an example with a PCF maybe. That's a single component metering system that comes with heat. But the key is you have to keep that material hot all the time. Otherwise it will cure or harden.
Solidify.
Yep. So that's kind of our generic bulk unloader. We used the word before, drum unloader, bulk unloader. That's what the hot melt version is. It's called the Thermoflow.
So this is funny. So back in the day, this is going back 30 years now. I used to work when I was in college. I worked at the Little Debbie plant in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Okay. Yeah, that would be.
I'm sorry for those that know Collegedale, Tennessee. So salutes to Little Debbie in Collegedale and Southern College. I worked there on the Swiss cake roll line.
Okay.
So I would take Swiss cake rolls off the line and slide them into the box. They'd be packaged 2 per thing, you know, and you got to get 6 of them in a box. Well, right in front of me on the other side, so first of all, the boxes would come in one conveyor. They would come up and ramp in front of you, and on the other side of the conveyor was the conveyor that had all the Little Debbies in it. And there were 4 of us in line, and our job was literally just like this, 2, 2, 2, or however you could get 6 in the box. And the box would continue going, and then it would go around, and it would go through the precision, not so precise application of hot melt.
Yes.
That it would go through the folder to seal the box up. And let me tell you what, this lady, her name was Sharon, and she was an angel. You want to see Sharon get mad? When that HFR, when that hot melt machine was on the fritz, she'd be over there. I mean, she would be over there with a what is it? The
Scraper or
the
something?
scraper, you know,
Yeah.
the blade, like drywall, you know, putty blade,
putty
putty
knife.
knife. There we go. I got it. She'd be over there, like scraping and cussing, and then all of a sudden boxes would start flying everywhere.
Yep.
And it would be an all hands on deck situation, you know, 2 or 3 people jumping over there to try to get everything back in row. But I think things have come a long way, and I'm sure for those of you that still work on the Little Debbie Swiss cake roll line, I'm sure things are better for you all now than they were back then. At least I hope so, 30 years later.
So that's a perfect transition, actually, to talk about our Invisipack system. So Invisipack is kind of our targeted system for case and carton sealing. That's what we would call that
Okay.
application. Gluing shut a box. And the Invisipack is tailor-made for that. It integrates nicely with the packaging line. It's a much smaller unit compared
Okay.
to the Thermoflows, actually. Thermoflow we see more in like RV manufacturing, gluing together panels in RVs, or
Wire manufacturers.
solar panel, beads of butyl on solar
Okay.
panels, and in window and door, that sort of thing. So more big beads of hot melt. When you get to the packaging side, it's more of a recent addition to our portfolio. The Invisipack unit is what you want there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I know there it was literally this little rectangle
Box.
hot pot
Yep.
that she would just scoop every now and then. She'd scoop
Yeah.
and pour,
Yeah.
and she'd have to keep her eye on the level of that.
That's right.
The whole shift, 8 hours,
Yep.
and it melted and was used so slowly. It wasn't something that was crazy amounts that were
Yep.
being used. But you take that system across all the lines of products that Little Debbie has in that plant, and you know there's a lot of dollars there. So
Yeah.
I'm sure, you know, if you run a company like that and you're listening to this podcast, you know, there are ways now, if you're using archaic science, you know, older ways of doing things. We were just talking earlier, and I'm sure the story's going to come up about ROI, you know, return on investment. Some people are scared when they look and they're like, oh man, that's going to cost us $100,000. But have you looked at the ROI? Have you actually looked at the amount of time that it will take to pay that back? We may not want to jump into that one story just yet, but if it fits into this section of products,
It doesn't matter where we implement. I mean, the ROI spans all products, right? And it's really about what does your production require, and what equipment do we need to provide to make that production be as profitable as possible. And what we found is, you know, just in this one example, they were taking it somewhere between 2 and 3 hours to change a drum of hot melt material. And for most people, if you don't know hot melt, just to think of wax, right? When you light the candle, it turns to a liquid. When it's
Right.
not, it's hard, it's solid. So
it's like a thermoplastic material.
that's essentially what they're doing. And this was a butyl. It was a potting application. But they would take 2 to 3 hours to change this single drum of material, because they got to allow it to come down from a 400 degree temperature,
Right.
and then they've got to allow the equipment to ramp up to 400 degrees once the drum has been changed, because they don't preheat the drum because they have to handle it. So in that 2 to 3 hours of production loss, if that were to run out, say at 2 o'clock in the afternoon during a first shift run, they could be out in essence $25,000 because they're losing 3 hours of production. So we figured that because they were changing the drums every other day, or even every 3 days, you know, they're losing $25,000 twice a week.
Right.
So within 2 weeks' time, they've
You've got
paid
$100
for
grand.
They've paid for the equipment.
You got $100,000 in downtime with
That's
the
exactly
line
right.
stop and production not coming out the other end.
That's right.
So production equals the profits. If your line's not running, man, one guy told me a long time ago, he owned a powder coating operation, and he said, Travis, I'm on the floor of my plant each and every day unless I have a sales situation I need to be in. I walk the plant every day. This was a huge shop, mostly a job shop. They did a little bit on the side of the manufacturing, and assembly. But he said, if that line stops, my mind immediately says you're losing money. And he's like, I am on that floor to find out where and what is causing this line to stop. Some things are okay and understandable, other things are not. And in this case, 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours to shut down a production line just because you don't have enough technology or enough equipment on hand to make that seamless. There's no excuse to cut that, to pull that plug on your line, shut it down, because you're wasting 3 hours of, and $25,000 worth of product.
Right. That's exactly
per
right.
time.
And it wasn't even a difficult solution.
Yeah.
They just needed another of what they had, and we tied them into what's called a tandem drum and loader system. So seamlessly, when one drum gets to its empty position, it crosses over immediately to the second drum. So we never stop pumping material. We never see a dip in the line at all.
Yep.
And then that gives them. They were changing drums every 2 days. That gives them roughly a day and a half to get a new drum over, get that one reloaded, and now they're ready to switch over again.
Yep.
So there's never maintenance is always worried that they have no time. They always have something to do, but they don't have the time to do it, right? Well, now I'm giving you that time to put it into your PM schedule and things
they'll
like
do
that.
it, but they can't do it right
That's
now.
exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So we try to make that a little bit easier for them, but that's exactly what it is.
And what was the solution there? Not the solution. What was the ROI?
It was 4 days.
4 days.
4 days. I mean, most people would like an ROI to be within 1 year.
Yeah.
If we can do it within 6 months,
The solution was $100,000. Let's just say basically what it was. The solution is $100,000 to invest in this system to make this tandem.
Yep.
So to spend $100,000, and you're right, most people look at a year, sometimes a little bit more,
Sometimes.
for an ROI. In this case, literally 4 changeouts, 2 per week.
Yep.
4 changeouts, 4 actual physical days. Well, actually, let's say 2 weeks.
The 2 weeks would
Let's
be
say a 2-week ROI.
Yeah.
That is an absolute no-brainer.
Yeah.
6 months is a no-brainer. How fast can you implement this? So, if you have downtime in your operation in relation to HFR or other items being pumped or delivered in your plant, you should talk to these 2 guys right here.
Got it.
And if you do need to call them, call 1-800-334-1001. Shameless plug. All right, we had one more. We had precision meter dispense. I think you did touch on that, though.
Yeah, I mentioned the PCF unit. So precision continuous flow is what that stands for. It's the more modern version of precision flow or P-flow, if you remember those from back in the 90s time frame. Single component closed loop metering system. So you supply it with pressurized material, you run it through a flow meter and pressure regulator, and there's software on there to precisely control the flow or pressure of the outbound side of it. Yep.
All right. I promised you we would talk about some product highlights.
Yeah.
So we have Voltex.
Yes. So
Let's
let's
talk about Voltex.
brand new product that I launched this year with my team in about February of this year, 2021. What it is a dynamic mix head. There's multiple different names we could call it. It's a rotary static or static dynamic mixer, if you want to be very accurately describing what it is. Essentially what it is you're taking your 2 component materials, you're bringing them together at the nose of this valve, and then there's a mixing element at the bottom that actually spins at up to 4,400 RPM. So the reason you need that, let's talk about why you need that. There's certain material chemistries, namely polyurethane foams and silicone foams, that need that extra energy or shear into the material for the gas bubbles that are a result of the chemical reaction to form properly and get you that nice, dense, uniform structure of your foam.
Okay.
If you try to make foam with a static mixer, so we have another valve called the MD2, it's kind of our traditional static mix 2-component valve. You try to make foam through that, it's just not going to look good. The cell structure is going to be inconsistent. You're going to have large pockets of air in one spot, and we believe that that's a result of not shearing the material enough, not putting that extra energy into the material to allow it to create that nice bubble structure in the foam. So the Voltex, it pairs really nicely with our EFR system that I covered on before. So all the controls of the Voltex are built right into the EFR software. It's basically a seamless whole solution for dispensing those, like I said, foams, or maybe even some hard to mix materials. Some epoxies might benefit from it. We're seeing a lot of industry trends to use these sorts of materials in electric vehicles. We touched on electrification earlier, and seeing that as a market trend in a lot of different industries. There's foams and gasketing materials that are used in EV all over the place, and the Voltex is really doing a nice job with those.
What's the primary application for the foam materials in electric vehicles?
So the battery of an electric vehicle is one of probably the top two. The motor and the battery are the top two important components in the EV. Batteries themselves are difficult to manufacture, and they store a lot of energy inside of it. So if people think back to when EVs were first coming out, there were some thermal events, I'll call them that, when these batteries would fail. Either by puncture, or something sharp on the road would puncture a battery, or just a manufacturing defect, something like that. And these really powerful thermal events, I'm going to call them that. I'm not going to use the other word for that. That would happen on these vehicles, and gosh, the people in the vehicle would be trapped, and it's just a terrible situation because these fires would just burn really fast and hot. Well, now there's these newer foam materials that you use to actually encapsulate the whole battery cell, and that foam essentially prevents that thermal runaway inside the batteries. It's a complete suppression. You're taking away oxygen, and it's an insulator essentially between all the cells. The other cool thing about it is it's really lightweight, right? You don't want to fill your battery with something really heavy. Of course, you could build the whole thing out of a crazy fireproof box and things like that, but think how heavy that is. Your efficiency of your vehicle then suffers. So this foam is a perfect solution for that, and we're seeing a lot of traction on that right now.
Perfect. And then did you want to talk about eFlow SP?
Yeah. So eFlow SP and IQ, those are our modern electrified supply systems. When we first started talking about equipment at the very beginning of the podcast, I was talking about pneumatic rams, pneumatic pumps. Really the future of those we see is in this eFlow SP and eFlow IQ lines. Think of it, it's doing the same job. It's pressurizing and controlling the flow of a single component in a drum. So if you do have a two-component material, you need two of them. Electric motor, we can control, again, the torque, the speed, the position of those motors, and tie it in software-wise into our other systems as well. Now you have kind of a whole electric solution from drum all the way to your dispense point, your tip of your valve. And having that control and the data you get from it and the integration possibilities, it's really the future of manufacturing.
Yep. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, the one thing we were talking about foams, foams in electric vehicles is vitally important, but also in the appliance manufacturing world. So every appliance, whether we talk about a dishwasher or a refrigerator, they all have gasketing, right? To keep things sealed. And most of that gasketing is foam filled.
Yeah.
And we do that with two-component polyfoams. And we have to dynamically mix those foams together to get that introduction of the bubbles to create the density or the softness or the density hardness of that foam. So everybody has a stove and everybody has a refrigerator, and not everybody has an electric vehicle, but it applies to everyone, right? So that's what I think is pretty important as far as the foam portion of it. As far as the eFlow SPs and the eFlow IQ, so the electric pumping systems, what's important is I think you can control your flow rate and your pressure at a touch of a button. There's no more dials. There's no more pressure gauges.
This is,
There's no more regulators. So we can select if we want to have a production line running at 30 cc's a second. All I do is submit 30 cc's a second into an ADM, an advanced display module, and that's what that servo motor is going to maintain, right? And so that way I have nothing between the pump and where the pump is pumping it to, the dispense point. And I think that's really important. One thing I'll point out with Graco, and this is not just Graco applied fluid division, the AFD side of things, this is Graco as a whole, is they do a really good job of standardizing their logic,
Right.
Keeping everything the same across all channels. So what you're seeing there is an advanced display module, and they're the same on every piece of equipment, whether it be for sealants and adhesives or paint equipment.
Yep.
And so, yes, the functionality of it will be a little different because we have different things we want to do with different pieces of equipment. But the way you get to those different functions is the same through soft keys.
Right. So, and this right here, the first time I was introduced to this was on the finishing side with Pro Mix and the PD2Ks and whatnot. And you can go from unit to unit with the same AFD with changing out the key. Was it, they call it a key or the token?
Take out a token.
Yep.
And, change your token out. And so, are those same controllers the controllers that would use on your division of products with a different token?
Exactly. It's just
And
different software
it
on
is
it. And
easy to use, and our team, our team of account managers that are in the field and the specialists that support them, for an account manager to come into Air Power, they can learn this pretty quick.
Yep.
It's not overly complicated.
Right.
It's not crazy. They do have to spend some time, and we do the proper education with them. But being able to take that technology and move for an account manager to move from finishing where they're used to this already,
Yep.
and then moving into the AFD world and being able to start to utilize, I recognize this, I know how to use this. Now we got to talk volume, pressure, whatever, just a little bit different world, but utilizing the same. I mean, it's the same thing down there. You're using multiple component systems.
Sure.
You've got what's the ratio? How much of this? How much of that? What's my total output? And it's the same thing.
yeah, I was trying to think of an analogy. It's like a Ford truck or a Ford car. You're going to have similarities between them. They do different things, of course. Same thing with our systems here. And it's not just the ADM. This is kind of the human interface device that everybody interacts with. But underneath the control panel, there's other controls inside of there that are common between all of our
Right.
systems. So
That's exactly right.
as soon as you get familiar with kind of the different components that go into all these different types of systems we have, you can kind of take away that fear of unfamiliarity, right? All of a sudden, I recognize that thing. Usually the pressure sensor plugs in right here, or this is where my communication line goes. It just becomes almost second nature to look at them.
And for those that are in production management or are the one responsible for dealing with this, they can also lock everybody else out.
That's exactly
And,
right.
They
can be
can.
password protected. Another important thing we put in a system a couple months back, and we were talking about data, right? And getting data from new electric pumps and how much material usage there is and what flow rates you're running at and all that good stuff. But the most important data that they appreciated was when something went wrong. Because inevitably something's going to go wrong
Right.
with equipment. It doesn't matter who manufactured it, something's going to happen, right? Well, with an electric system here, or like with our HFRs or EFRs or any of the systems that use an advanced display module, you're going to receive, when there is an error, a QR code. So you everybody's got their phone on them, take your QR code, you scan the QR code, and it takes you to Graco's website and to the error message that you need to see to correct the problem. So with that being said, I think data is important, but it also is important on how to fix things, right? Your guy's walking the floor, when something's down, he's got to figure out what it is.
That's right.
If he can walk over with his phone and find out what that problem is and get it fixed, well, he's back making money again.
That's
So
right.
that's the important piece there.
All right. That is definitely a familiar world. Let's talk about some examples of Air Power and Graco working in the field in this world. Either of you want to take a stab at
Since we were talking about electric and things like that, we're working on a project currently that involves everything electric. So it's a solution where the customer is wanting to apply a two-part polyurethane, and it's a very low flow rate application. So what we're needing from the equipment is to be able to control that flow rate at the low flow rates precisely. So what we're doing is we're taking an E-Flow SP pump, actually two Tandem E-Flow SP systems. So that means we'll have a 5-gallon Tandem E-Flow SP feeding on the we'll call it accelerant or catalyst side. And then we have a 55-gallon Tandem system feeding on the resin or poly side.
Okay.
And then that's feeding an EFR. The EFR is going to maintain that it's a 10-to-1 ratio material. And that material will be sent to an MD2 valve that's going to be mounted to an XY table. So they're applying beads of material at this really low flow rate through this XY table. And the problem is we would love to be able to sell them a very expensive robot that can go faster. That would be great. Unfortunately, that's not in the budget. So we have to compromise, and the compromise is let's take it from the start. We always like to start from the drum and work our way to the dispense point. And so we're doing that, and so we're going to change everything to the table. And if they eventually customer decides they want to change the robot or do it a little different, we have the capability to expand. If we want to run faster, we can run faster. The problem is we can't run slow enough, which is usually the opposite of what we're asked to do. We always want to run faster. But that's an example of us taking a system that is completely pneumatic now and converting it to completely electric.
Okay.
Yeah, and so the benefits of not only, like we talked about before, noise, air consumption, right? Being able to achieve the flow rates they need via the servo motor that's driving these two parts is what we're going to be able to do with this system. So that's one piece where we've taken the new technology that Graco has put into the market and applied it to take out still Graco equipment. We're replacing Graco equipment, which is okay because we're doing it with the newest technology. Right. So we're looking at this as a system that's going to last, 20 years from now. I don't know what it's going to be, but I know this is the cutting edge today, right? And so that's one example of how we've used Graco for what Graco's intended it to be. Now I'll tell you this, Air Power does a really good job of taking what Graco intends equipment to be and making it do something else sometimes, because that's what the application requires.
Right.
Not all systems that are put out on paper with Graco are intended to do exactly what that paper says, right? So we find creative ways to take that technology, whatever it may be, and put it into the application that's required, right?
We've touched on something several times in this podcast, and it's something that's come up on multiple podcasts. And I'll just say it like it is. Repeatability is profitability.
Sure.
If you can repeat something, the closer and more accurately you can repeat it every single time, then you can dial everything else around. And so repeatability is profitability.
It's a great way.
Unless you're doing it really wrong.
Yeah.
If you just keep repeating it, doing it the bad way every time. But honestly, if you're fine tuning your system, and you can make that card come off the line and look exactly like that card after you've done 100,000 of these at one back to back. And you hold them up next to each other and you can't tell anything different, that repeatability is profitability, because there's no stops and starts and mess ups and scrapes and this and that. So never forget that. Repeatability is profitability.
That's right.
All right, do we want to go over any of the stories? Any other?
I thought that was a great one to wrap up with, I think.
Yeah.
All right. What is the future in automation? Let's talk about that a
Yeah.
little bit. Future in automation in respect to AFD and SAE, and I just kind of want to lob that one out and talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, I can start. So, automated dispensing. Really, the goal of it is going back to what you just said, repeatability. No offense to any hand assemblers out there, but a robot is going to be able to do it more repeatably every time for the next foreseeable future. The other key aspect of it is productivity. I know that right now, current times, there are a lot of labor force issues out there. By automating something or connecting it to a robot type dispensing system, you can take away some of that labor that's required to stand there every day and do a hand operation. You can maybe have that person doing something more valuable in the factory, maybe maintaining the whole line instead of doing each single part, things like that.
We are in a really weird time right now.
Yeah.
Like never in my life have I ever seen. I turned 50 this year, so I've been around a while. I have never seen. I've been on the road for, let's see, since 1996 really is when I started hitting the road for sales, and for over half of my career, way over half of my career, I was traveling all over North America. So I have never ever seen where I got to preface this and say it right. First of all, I've had people say in the manufacturing world, I have a hard time keeping employees because none of them can pass the drug test.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've heard that forever. That's been going on a long time, right? That's been going on probably forever. What I haven't seen is leaving my home in Nashville and stopping for dinner or stopping for lunch.
Yep.
And then stopping for dinner post COVID, as COVID started to settle down somewhat, everyone was back. Nobody wants to work.
Yeah.
Restaurant closed for lunch. A drive-through open only. Get over here for dinner. Dining room closed. We don't have enough employees.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, 6 months ago, okay, I see that. It's today, right now, today, restaurants all over the place are closing their dining rooms because they don't have enough employees.
Not enough workers.
Pharmacies, where I live in Nashville, my wife has a particular pharmacy she goes to that's tied to a national grocery chain. Drive-through window closed. Mm-hmm. We don't have enough people to work the window, and you have 20 people inside the grocery store in line waiting to get their prescriptions filled, and 2 people working as hard as they can, including the pharmacist, to try to process people because they cannot get employees to work.
Yeah.
So that argument, I segued that very importantly to say this. That argument years ago where people were like, oh, robots, they're going to take away our jobs. They're the enemy. No.
They're going to help.
The employee that doesn't want to work is the enemy.
Yes.
The robot is there to, let's say it like it is, do the job every day that they're not going to do.
Yep.
And do it better than anybody did it.
Yep.
Now, the smart money and the smart young person in today's society that's in high school or college age that is thinking about what to do for their career, let me tell you, look, right here, mm-hmm. Engineering, automation, talk about being able to harness that technology and put it to use in a practical aspect. Let me tell you, there will be no shortage of jobs. Right. Mark my words right now.
Yeah, I mean, robots don't run themselves.
No.
They have to be managed. They have to be maintained.
And things do go wrong.
Yeah, they don't, and they don't last forever. And things have to be, preventive maintenance is a real thing. It's a daily occurrence. Somebody has to be doing that.
Yeah.
So, I I think where this automation is going is not, and it's not always a robot. It's not always this robot that we all know about,
Correct.
a 6-axis robot. You know, it can be as simple as a single acting cylinder that's pushing a valve up and down all day
Right.
long.
Yep.
That's considered automation, right? So, you know, where we kind of come into play with Graco is we can take every bit of this Graco equipment and put it into an automated setting, right? There's not really, I mean, there's still, don't get me wrong, there's still valves and things that have to be triggered, right, manually. That's always going to be there. You're always going to have that type process. But the first question we get asked mostly is, hey, how can I automate this?
How do I connect it?
How do I make this
Yeah.
talk to something else,
Yeah.
right? And so,
And what are they really asking?
how do I? Well, I mean, they want to do it better. They want to
They-
do it faster. They,
They want
eliminate.
repeatability.
That's it.
And they want profitability,
Yeah.
and they realize that going that path is where that's where those 2 points connect.
And
And-
we've seen those conversations go up just in volume because of COVID.
Yeah.
You know, because of what
Right.
we've been through the last 18, 19 months. You know, they've got time to kind of sit back and visualize where the future is going to be for whoever whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think, you know, that we're in a really good place, not only Air Power but Graco, to take this to the next level. It's just a matter of finding those opportunities, having those people reach out to us and let us come in and help them provide the solution that they really ultimately need, right?
I do want to segue that into something that we kind of skipped over. We're talking about market trends,
Yeah.
and we talked about electrification a little bit, but I do want to expand on it potentially.
Sure.
When we talk about electrification, it's basically break that down, making that an integral part of the process versus something else. And we also wanted to talk about the Internet of Things.
Yes. Yeah.
So, you guys, which one wants to start that out?
Sure, I'll start. So, the robotic trend that we just talked about is happening. Let's all just be honest
Yep,
about it. It's
straight up.
happening.
Sure.
The next thing that's coming is industrial Internet of Things.
And maybe
Yeah.
we should call that the automation instead of robotic.
Yeah.
Because it all ties into that, like you said, whether it's an actual physical axis
True.
robot or whether it's just something that does the same thing all day long in a very precise,
Yep. Repeatable,
calculated.
use that word again.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, so that's happening. IoT, Industrial Internet of Things, is really what's coming next. And what that, the whole point of it is to connect devices, get data from them that a person, or maybe even in the future, artificial intelligence, can look at that data, feed it back to the process controls, whether it's through a connected device or just on the interface that we talked about earlier, and make some tweaks to either improve their cycle time, how fast they're making parts, improve their quality of their dispense. If they need a little bit more glue in a certain section or a little less glue, they can dial that in better.
remotely.
All
Yep.
sorts of connected ways to do that.
We have a lot of people on our podcast wall, and I'm thinking of already we've had. This will be the episode 9 of season 1, and I can already think of 2 that are up there on the wall right now that are not even competitors. Really, it's St. Clair and Clico in the tool market,
Yep.
and both of them the same thing: the Internet of Things, and being able to look at the plant stepping back. And now it's no longer communication one way, it's communication, both.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of it.
So a couple examples. We actually talked about earlier how a QR code can come up on the advanced display module. So if you do have some sort of error that happens to the machine, that technically is getting towards that Internet of Things. Yes, there's a manual process, you got to scan the QR code, but no longer are you just looking at the manual that maybe was printed 5 years ago. We can actually update that website continually with new troubleshooting steps, ideas of how to fix the problem. And if we see trends on that website, we may try to do some training on it. So Graco's looking
Right.
at some of that data as well, and maybe we put out a bulletin that says, hey, if you got this problem, look at it this way. So that's kind of your first step. Second, after that, is good examples on the InvisiPack system. We have a product called LineSight on there that connects all the InvisiPack systems in a plant. You know, you might have 10, 15, maybe even 20 of these case and carton sealing lines, you know, at your little Debbie plant,
Yeah.
right? That sort of system, it's a pain for the maintenance manager to walk to every one and check on how it's doing and waste all that time. You know, he could get to the end of the line on the 20th line and, oh shoot, the first one just started having a problem. Now I got to walk all the way back across the factory. Well, this LineSight product actually connects all these units so the person can see it on his phone or tablet or even from his office. He can be sitting at his desk in his office and see the status of all of his packaging machines. If it's a green light right on the screen, he knows it's all good. If there's a yellow light or a red light, hey, that line's having a problem. It'll tell me what the problem is. Oh, it's a hose or something like that. I'm going to grab a part proactively and bring it out there with me so I don't have to come back to get it. So it's just those adding up those little savings that you can get and those little efficiency gains. That's where this IoT revolution is going to be coming.
And all that little stuff makes a big impact.
It does. It does.
You anything else you want to say closing out?
You know, I'm good. I appreciate the opportunity. I think this is gonna.
I think this is fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's great.
All right, so we're going to close out. I want to say thank you, Matt.
Thanks
Thank
for
you
having
very
me.
much for coming in and
It was
spending
a
time
pleasure.
with us today.
Yes.
Jason,
brother.
always good to see
Yep.
you, brother. Well, all right, couple things to close out here. First of all, you can find this podcast two places. Video version on the AirPower YouTube channel. So go to YouTube, search AirPower or AirPower Manufacturing Solutions. You're going to find the AirPower page. Every video we've ever done is on that YouTube channel. You can also go to our website. Well, back up. You can also go to airpower.airwaves.com and get access to the video versions. And we have airpowerlive.com where we have other videos, the technical training videos and whatnot. If you want to find this podcast, you're watching YouTube and you want to find this podcast, just literally go anywhere you want. Stitcher, Pandora, Apple, anywhere that you know where podcasts are. Go and search for AirPower Airwaves or AirPower Manufacturing Solutions or AirPower Inc. You'll find us. So, 800-334-1001 is the phone number to call and just ask for help, whatever you need. And then the AirPower website, the official website, airpower-usa.com. And then social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, all of the above. There might be one I'm not remembering, but
I think that's all up.
we are all over social media land.
Yeah.
I think I got it. So I'm going to close this one out like I do every other podcast, and I'm going to tell you to manufacture it a great day.